Wow. All right. I'm almost done talking, but first, it is my pleasure to introduce our artist for this evening. First, Donald E. Camp is a Philadelphia-based artist and Professor Emeritus at Ursinus College, where there is a photography collection in his name. Camp came to Philadelphia in 1972, where he served as staff photographer for the Evening and Sunday Bulletin until 1981. While at the Bulletin, he co-founded the original chapter of the Association of Black Journalists in Philadelphia and published his work in People, Ebony, Deux Ex Machina, and Newsweek. Camp received his BFA and MFA from Temple University Tyler School of Art, Go Owls, and is subject of the American Artist Oral History at the Smithsonian Institute. He is the recipient of numerous grants and fellowships from the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Pew Fellowship in the Arts. In 2009, he received his 4th Pennsylvania Council of the Arts Fellowship for his noted body of work, Dust-Shaped Hearts, a series of monograph prints using light-sensitive casein and dry earth pigments. Camp has lectured and exhibited internationally at museums, including the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia and the National Museum of Gambia, and his works are in the collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and the Delaware Art Museum. Welcome, Don. Are you there?
Welcome. I am here. Thank you very much. It's nice being here.
Fantastic. All right. Next, I'm actually going to switch to the first person here and read this from our next panelist, Ed Eckstein. At a very early age of 13, I knew that photography was to be my calling. There was never a plan B. Being the staff photographer for my junior high and high school papers, and turning my mother's laundry room into a photo lab were my entry into the craft and profession. While attending classes at the Philadelphia College of Art, I became very restless and decided to start on the path of self-employment as a freelance photographer. I began working for nonprofits and small publications, as well as doing my own work. In short time, I started working for some of the popular magazines of the area, including Boys Life, Saturday Review, Coronet, and Presbyterian Life. My work covering news events and social issues in the turbulent 1960s led to several exhibits, as well as the publication Coming of Rage. I went on to do assignments for publishers and graphic design firms, as a large part of my work was for non-governmental organizations, including mission work in Africa and in village in northeastern Brazil. 2 commissions from the James A. Michener Art Museum include portraits of domestic abuse and a study of life in a hospital, which resulted in an exhibit and a museum book titled Brick and Mortals. Over the last several years, I've been working with Native Americans trying to show that way of life in our current society. Much of my work remains film-based that I personally process and print. I feel this process is grounded in a tradition that I think is important to continue. Ed Eckstein, welcome. Are you there, Ed? Oh, Ed, you're muted. Say hello.
Hello. Sorry.
Hey, Ed.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next is Ada Trillo, is a Philadelphia-based photographer native to the Juarez-El Paso binational metroplex. In her work, she focuses on borders of inclusion and exclusion as they are experienced through people in sex trafficking, climate and violence-related international migration, and long-standing borders of race and class. Through the elements of documentary and fine art photography, Trillo lays bare our common humanity and dignity and brings attention to the impact borders have on exploited and marginalized people by amplifying their voices. Trillo's work is in the permanent collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She is the recipient of the Female in Focus 2020 Best Series Award and has recently featured in The Guardian, Vogue, Smithsonian Magazine, and Mother Jones, among other publications. She has also been awarded the Me and Eve Grant with the Center of Photographic Arts in Santa Fe and received first place in editorial with the Tokyo International Photo Awards. Trillo has exhibited both nationally and internationally in New York City, Philadelphia, Luxembourg, England, Italy, and Germany. She holds degrees from the Istituto Margherino in Milan and Drexel University in Philadelphia. And I know Ada is having a little bit of trouble with her video, but are you there? Say
Yes,
hello.
hi. Thank you for having me here.
Fantastic. I also really quickly want to introduce our panel moderators for this evening. First is Laura Turner Igoe, the Michener's very own chief curator. Laura, are you there?
I am. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today.
And also, as part of our special partnership with Ursinus, we have Robert Varney, who is a photographer and a 2020 Ursinus graduate. Robert, can you say hello?
Hey everyone, thank you for having me tonight.
Awesome. All right, I think I've talked entirely too much. I'm actually now going to turn it over to Laura, who's going to give us a brief introduction to the exhibit, Through the Lens, Modern Photography in the Delaware Valley, which this event is in conjunction with. Take it away, Laura.
Thank you, Matt. Can you all see my screen? Yeah, great. So I'm going to just give a very brief preview of Through the Lens, Modern Photography in the Delaware Valley that's on view at the Michener Art Museum until August 15th. It was curated by myself and Tara Kaufman, who's on this call as well. And the exhibition explores nearly 70 years of artistic experimentation with photographic techniques and subject matter by artists in the Delaware Valley. So artists who have lived in the area, who were educated in the area, taught in the area, or spent some significant time in the region. Overall, it features over 100 photographs by nearly 40 artists. And it's organized in 4 different sections. The first is Light and Shadow, Still Life in the Body, Landscape, Perceptions of Place, Community, Who We Are, and Protest and Progress, Photographing Change. And while these featured photographers have embraced a wide variety of subject matter and techniques, all the photographs in the exhibition are united by this deep interest in photographic processes, both historic and new, and the medium's capacity for expanding our perception of the world around us. So our program tonight is inspired by the section Protest and Progress, which all 3 artists are included in. And this section highlights photographers who work in the thick of protests or capture quieter private moments of adversity and hope. They all provoke an emotional response and offer bold statements of conviction through these incisive shots, subject matter, and framing. From the social and political turmoil of the 1960s to the Black Lives Matter protests today, the photographs in this section amplify the individuals and moments that make up a movement. And it's a really powerful moment in the exhibition too, this section. So I'm thrilled that we have Ed Eckstein, Don Camp, and Ada Trillo with us today. And hold on. Here's just a very brief look at their work that's in the exhibition and work that they might be also talking more about in their presentation. So I'm going to let the real stars of the show take over. So I'll pass it over to you, Don.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'm very proud to have the work being shown there. Thank you very much. And it's wonderful seeing everyone here. It's kind of chronological in what I'm going to talk about. And it starts in 1955. I lived in a small steel town in Western Pennsylvania. In a steel mill town, the dust from the smelting of steel settles over the town. It settles on the cars, it settles on the grass, and it settles in our lungs. Decades later, I begin to understand how the existence of dust shaped my life. In 1955, I worked in my father's barber shop. I was a barber's apprentice. I swept up a lot of hair. I shined a lot of shoes, but I also sold the newspapers and magazines that were published by and for Black people. I was 5 days shy of being 15 when I sold the magazine that you see on the screen right now. It was the Jet magazine that published the mutilated 15-year-old body of Emmett Till. And I have cut the page in half that's on the right because that shows the face. And if you look at it, you can find it on screen now, but it's that face that changed my mind. And it didn't change at all in a good way. I heard the customers in the barbershop argue about what that photograph meant. Some of the men who had migrated from the South and experienced the brutality of the South said that the boy should have known better. And some of the men who experienced World War II and Korea and had returned to experience segregation, lynching, and Jim Crow laws said enough is enough. So working in the barbershop and hearing those arguments taught me a whole lot more than how to cut hair. In June of 1964, I was in Eilerson Air Force Base in Fairbanks, Alaska. Slide 2, please. And I saw this triptych. It's newspaper and magazines of 3 freedom fighters, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner. Arrested, released, hunted down, murdered, burned, and buried for freedom and justice. In 1968, I was in Columbus, Ohio, when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. In 1968, I was in Columbus, Ohio, when Robert Kennedy was assassinated. In 1972, I joined the Bulletin staff as a photographer with the Philadelphia Evening and Sunday Bulletin. I was the first Black photographer in the city and the 4th in the country to work for a major daily newspaper. The civil rights activities of the 1960s had opened the door for many of us to enter the American newsroom. And it was there that the importance of the headshot was reinforced for me. The photographs of Emmett Till, the photographs of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner are what the newspaper calls headshots. Sometimes an entire photo shoot would be condensed to a single headshot. And the newsroom library is full of, which is called the morgue, and it's filled with headshots. I also grew up knowing that the only time that a Black person appeared in the main regional or the daily city newspapers, it would be a headshot, usually connected with a crime and often cruel comedy. The diversity of the newsroom staff and the diversity of what appeared in the newspaper was minimal. However, in all of this, Dr. Martin Luther King said that he had a dream. And in that dream, he saw that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. Slide 3, please. And that American flag and those faces in this photograph by Robert Frank, I connect that to what Martin Luther King said, that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, because there's something in that particular photograph that is so powerful and unknowing, but there's a future. But our subject for the night is the camera as a social tool. Which slide 4, please. This is one of my works. It's called Emmett Till America. The images were appropriated from newspaper imagery. It was printed on glass, on a glass mirror. It was printed on a glass mirror so that you could see yourself in between the pixel dots. It's kind of a newspaper. It's a headshot. It's simply art. But the real issue that I think all of us are looking for is dealing with justice. It's a social issue dealing with justice. And justice is a global issue. And like it or not, all families, tribes, states, and nations are involved. Now, the case of George Floyd is now on trial. And last year, there were peaceful demonstrations worldwide proclaiming that Black Lives Matter. was a beautiful time for the photography to show what it can do in seeking to show the opportunity for justice. However, in 1967, I read words that changed my life about justice. And it's the words of, "It is not for him to pride himself who loveth his own country, but rather for him who loveth the whole world." And this is another thing that began to change what I learned when I was 15 years old with the death of Emmett Till. I learned that the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. Now, I'm most often questioned about my choice of photographic materials and my method for making a print. But my Guggenheim Fellowship is for photography. My Pew Fellowship is for works on paper. But I consider myself a photographer because one of my instruments is a camera. But I consider myself a photographer because I work with light. So I want to state one thing that's quite obvious at this point, that a photograph is not the thing photographed. A photograph is a thing unto itself. And for that reason, the material that I use to make the photographic print or photographic light sensitized objects is important. Photographs were and are used in newspapers, but it is the newspaper that is the thing. For decades, newspapers told biased and or incomplete stories of women, Black, Asian, indigenous, in fact, almost anyone who was not white male. They were not photographed or written about in positive light. I use the term photographic omission, or where one would expect to see a photograph, but there are none. Slide 5, please. When working with silver gelatin, the photo print material at that time, I felt constricted by the form. I felt constricted by the rules of what made an acceptable print, and therefore an acceptable image or metaphor of its content. I felt limited by the material. This particular piece I call In the Morning, but it is simply a pure photographic print with no content. But I do feel that it's also quite beautiful and it's in a collection. I wanted my work, however, I did want my work to be produced and felt like blues. I wanted it to feel like field hollers. I wanted to feel like slave chants. Because the steel mill dust that I breathed was influenced by workers from the Mississippi Delta. It was the dust of people of the world who had escaped for some reason from their families or tribes or state or nation, and they came to that little steel town to produce steel in Western Pennsylvania. But my work, I wanted it to feel and look like Jimmy Reed in Muddy Waters. I wanted James Bud Alma to resonate in my work. I could only get that if I knew and used the metaphor of dust. And I learned to use dust as the material for my imagery. Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, wrote, and this is spiritual, "O children of dust, tell the rich of the midnight sighing of the poor, lest heedlessness lead them into the path of destruction and deprive them of the tree of wealth. To give and to be generous are attributes of mine. Well, it is with him that adorneth himself with my virtues." And I love the beginning of that, "O children of dust." And I think my prints are children of dust. If we could go ahead and look at the next prints, please. Brother who taught me to ride a bicycle, James Camp. Next print. Silver Cowboy, Mr. Gassenberger. Next print, please. Brother who taught me to see, Herbert Camp. Next print, please. Chef. Next print, please. Leah Chase, believe me, sir. Dr. William Roberts, Baha'i Prayer. Next print, please. Professor. Next print, please. Robert Big Elk. Next print, please. Patrick Patillo, poet. Next print. Mentor. This man was very, very close to me. And just leave it at that, okay? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate all of those words, all those images. Next, we're going to move to Ed. All right, Ed.
After that talk, Don, I think we go right to Ada after that. So anyway. Basically, I started in Philadelphia with doing protest work. The first people, let me just see, where are we here? Oh, okay. So the very first group that I photographed were the Quakers. Whoops. They were pacifists, and they were the start of the whole anti-war movement at the Quaker Friends Committee in Philadelphia. And that's how I basically got very interested in societal change and protest work. And I started that in the 60s, and I've continued up until this year. I still have been working on it. I work primarily in film with handheld cameras, and I still process and print my own work. I feel that it's important for me to be part of that process, and it's helped me understand a lot of these pictures. We have the next picture, please. So this is also in the exhibit at the Michener, and that's one of my first pictures of racial change protest work, and that's in Atlantic City, New Jersey. That was a group of Freedom bus riders, and that was very, very big then. And these groups went all through the South. A lot of them were beat up and whatnot. And they continued the protest there. Next, please. This was a rally in Washington, D.C. That's Coretta Scott King and George McGovern on her right. That was at a time when there were probably like 5 photographers covering the whole thing. You know, it isn't like now where everybody has their cell phone cameras, and actually the selfie sticks are just more dangerous than the tear gas actually for this thing. So we have the next, please. This was a Klan rally in Delaware. It's actually a pretty rare picture that you got to see the ladies of the Klan. They seem so sweet, you know, but there's venom that you don't see in that picture. This is right before the rally started, and I was there for Philadelphia Magazine. I covered it for them. Next, please. This is the business of the Klan right here. This was right after that, cross burning. This is very vile, very venomous. It just was unbelievable to witness that. And not only that, is to see all these people that, I mean, there's like hundreds of people that you don't see in these pictures that are like on the grass knoll all around them. It was very, very disturbing for that. And next, please. This was at the Poor People's Campaign in Washington, D.C. This was right after Robert Kennedy was killed. There's a monument in the background. The Poor People's Campaign was for quite a few weeks. So many people were there, and they had these little houses they built all around in DC, around the White House and whatnot. Next. This was a rally in Philadelphia, an anti-war movement. That was right by City Hall. And this is when all the young people and the people that were very concerned about the draft, that was the big impetus then for a lot of these social rallies and whatnot. Next. This was at a memorial for soldiers that were killed in Vietnam. That's in the Wall Street area in New York City. Next. Next, please. This is a march in Philadelphia, also part of the Vietnam anti-war movement. It was, I think a lot of it was just because of the draft, and there was a big thing then. I don't think you have that intensity now with the war and whatnot as you had then. Next, please. This is a series I did for basic training. That's in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I was just kind of amused by the fact that he's now the best dressed soldier in the road isn't his pants on. And that was, I went there for, there was the great thing about Philadelphia at the time that I started freelancing, or self-unemployment as I call it. There were many magazines in the area, and Don might be aware of some of them. Every religious organization had a publishing house there, and they all did with these wonderful magazines. And there was Youth Magazine by the United Church of Christ, Presbyterian Life, the Episcopalians, and they created just a lot of work for people like myself. And the interest at that time was social issues. And so it was a great alignment of my interest and the magazine's interests to do that. And they, and I went to Africa and worked with missionaries, and it was a wonderful experience in working with these magazines. And of course, unfortunately now magazines are a thing of the past, and most of these, now everything's online, but there was something nice and very tactile about looking at a magazine. And although the money wasn't great, but the experience was just phenomenal of being in everybody's life for a little while. I mean, American Indians and soldiers and whatnot. Next, please. This is in Arlington. I was just, after photographing all these young kids that were going to Vietnam, teenagers for the most part, I was in Arlington and I just saw this rake against the sign, the tombstone with the word young on it. And this is something metaphorically about that that kind of struck me, that, that here we are with hundreds and hundreds of graves, and after like maybe 2 weeks before that picture was taken, I was watching all these guys, heading off for Vietnam, and it just kind of struck me. Next, please. In 2016, I received a commission from BuzzFeed to photograph the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia. And it was a lot of mayhem and whatnot. And I did this all in film, and they were very interested in working with a 4x5 camera, which is a big sheet film camera, which is very unusual considering all the people around me with their motor drives and whatnot. But it was an interesting project because they wanted to see something that could be done in film. And although when you see it online, it looks like maybe anybody else's stuff, but it was an interesting process of shooting film every day and going to a lab at night, having them run the film, and then BuzzFeed would have it on their site first thing in the morning. It was kind of interesting, the whole process. I've never done anything like that before, and probably won't do ever again. Next, please. This is part of from the Democratic Convention. It was very volatile, and there was a lot of pro-Bernie and pro-Hillary, and it was quite something. And they sidelined a lot of the protests, what they call the free speech zone, which was like pretty far away from the convention. But there was a big turnout, and there's a lot of demonstrations from that whole period for like 2 weeks. Next, please. This is in New York City. This starts the whole Trump movement here. Protests all over the place because of this guy. Whatnot. Next, please. There was another rally going down Fifth Avenue in New York City, actually 7th Avenue, where Trump was able to in his own way, just bring out so much of this, the protest movement. He kind of like really created a protest movement from all of the work that he did or didn't do. Next, please. So I was impressed by this woman. This was in New York City. And I have a feeling that, I mean, so she was probably in her apartment and she made this handmade sign in the middle of, there she is in the middle of this parade and whatnot. I mean, that the strength of her seemed to me so strong and her conviction so strong that she actually put this whole thing together. And it created this thing that I call sign language, which is all of this stuff where these people made all these signs and they would be in their apartments or houses and do this. It's quite impressive. Next, please. This is a march for the kids that were killed at Sandy Hook. The people that marched, they didn't want to show their faces. They really wanted to show the faces of the kids that were slaughtered at that episode. And they did this march right down Fifth Avenue in New York. And I thought there was just something very strong about that. It's like beekeeper nests almost on their heads. But the thing is that their conviction was, not to show them, but to kind of memorialize all the kids that were killed at that time. Next, please. This was a march over the Brooklyn Bridge. It's for the separation of families. This was another protest march that Trump helped create, and they marched into Brooklyn over the bridge. Next, please. This was actually in my town, Easton, Pennsylvania. There was a Black Lives Matter group there. And I thought this was very appropriate for what's going on right now. This gentleman holding this sign up. It's probably very true. Next. This was a community near me in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. And I thought, speaking of divisions, and it turns out, I found out that these people, they're sisters, and they both hate each other. And they put these signs in front of their stoops. It kind of struck me as kind of strange. Kind of told the whole division, divided we stand, as I call that. Next, please. This was in front of the Harrisburg Capitol, and this was right after the January 6th thing, where they expected a lot of grief going to be at the Capitol buildings all over the United States. And this was some people put this up, kept that up for a couple of days. Like that. So that's the end of my little slideshow here of this.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Really powerful photos, spanning lots of times and some similar ideologies there too. All right, Ada, are you there?
Yes, hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Hello. Yes, let me give me 1 second. I'll get your images up here. There you go. Go ahead, Ada.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. My name's Ada Trillo. I apologize that I'm not on camera, but I'm currently in Tijuana with really bad internet reception. I'm here working. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my work and what led me to it. So if you can go to the next, hello? Hello? No.
We can hear you, Ada.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Social justice has been a part of my family history since I can remember. The motto has always. Oh, okay. The motto has always be of service of others and try to make the world gift you have. I used to paint actually 6 years ago, and I switched on to photography because I started noticing that in the conversation, there started to be a lot of absurdities said, and there were started to be as Mexicans are rapists, race, etc. So I guess what I wanted to say the way that I could with a camera, because that way people know that it's unaltered and that what you see is a touch of reality, whereas with a painting, there is that always that question if it had been manipulated. So I started my journey with photography. Next slide, please. I'm from the border of El Paso, Texas, and Juarez, Mexico. I was born in El Paso, but I was raised in Juarez. And my photography relates to borders. But it's bigger than that. I want to bring awareness to the fact that a border is more than geography or politics or even a wall. It's I want to bring awareness to those borders that are buried in our societies, such as borders of exclusion, borders of race and class. What border is a division. And my work is a personal plea for humanity, and that the fight against homophobia, xenophobia, racism, discrimination, things that are really hurting our communities, hurting our country. I feel that when there's a mentality of us versus them, it's gonna create a lot of division, and atrocities are gonna start being committed, and this is gonna destroy nations. Our nation is gonna put the economy at risk, and it's gonna create enemies abroad. So I wanna bring unity and with my work and inform people through visual storytelling. Next one. One of the ways that I tell the stories of the people I photograph are that I have a journal. So in an exhibit, and I do video as well. I'll show a video of that person speaking, or I'll show pieces of the journal. In the case of covering the Black Lives Matter protest, I was very fortunate to do a collaboration with one of my best friends, Morgan Floyd. And Morgan, and she is gonna be telling us a poem related to my images. So it's us working together, and I wanted to put the voice of a young, talented African-American woman to go with my images of the protest and create unity between the Latino community and the African-American community. I wanted to create just something beautiful from this and do this collaboration with her. Next one. So as I mentioned before, my work relates to borders. This is in the Suchata River, in between the border between Guatemala and Mexico. And this is Joel, who does not have a leg. And it's bringing awareness to how are we treating those that might suffer from a disability, and also how are we integrating them into our communities, into our societies, or are they being treated as less than? So bringing those questions up. Next one. This is Javi, which I met at the Benito Juarez shelter in Tijuana in the caravan of 2018 with his mother. He suffers from Down syndrome and was given asylum in the United States. And this is one of the stories of hope that I have. And it's just, again, how we're treating those that are different from us, but at the same time, they're us because they're humanity. Next one. And this personally is one of my favorite images. This was taken in the caravan of 2020. And this is Ashley, a trans woman. And unfortunately, in the Northern Triangle, composed of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, the LGBTQ community, which I'm a member of, suffers extreme discrimination, and not only that, death and murder. So it's highlighting her story, so that trying to make people understand that everybody is the same and atrocities shouldn't be committed. Next one. This image I love because when I saw it, this is how I felt. Is tu lucha es mi lucha. It says your fight is my fight, and it was in the protest here in Philadelphia. The Latino news channels of Univision and Telemundo were really not giving a good description of the protest, and were putting very negative context to them. And that really bothered me because it is thanks to the civil rights movement and the African-American community that Latinas like myself have now rights. So to me, this was very important to acknowledge that it's a fight for everybody. And now is time for Morgan to unmute herself and speak and share her beautiful poetry with us. For the next slide.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Lloyd. Thank you, Ada, for inviting me here. And thank you, everyone, for accommodating me in this space. This poem is called Where the Fruit is Bared. My mother taught me how to speak to the trees. And like her mother before her, and her mother before her, we've all been taught how to listen, to wait before taking its fruit. Though I've yet to hear a name, nor has a single one told me its age, I've heard many stories. There's a whispering in the rustling leaves of timeless tales of growth, of dreams intertwined like vines to bear sweet fruit that one day shall safely return to soil. If you knock politely upon the bark, it can tell you all that it has seen. In storm, the triumphant sound of crackling branches holds mourning. And in the morning, lays the dew of tears yet to be wiped away. Mama says you have to look into its face before you take another fruit. Let the tree know you're grateful for its service, resilience, and strength in its silence. You know, not many people do. Not many people see. But just so you know, the fruit of life always tastes sweeter to those who consider talking to the trees. Back to you, Ada.
Thank you. So for me, that's what my work is collaborations, is hearing, is listening, is photography, and that's all I have. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for sharing, Ada, and thank you for sharing, Morgan. Thank you for sharing all of our panelists. Truly remarkable, powerful, important work, everyone. We're now into the segment of our program where we're going to hear from our moderators. Before we do that, I just want to remind everyone, after this, we will have time for your questions. So if you do have thoughts or questions, put those into the chat and we will get right to those in just a few moments. But now I want to turn it over to Robert, who's going to put our first question to our panelists. Robert?
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. So to open up the discussion, my first question is that seeing that all three of you have worked as photojournalists and documentarians, how important is that temporary relationship that you have with your subject, and how does that affect the choices you make in the creation of the art after you have taken that image?
Thank you, Robert. Does Ed or Don or Ada, does one of you want to go first?
And I can go.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, I spent a very brief time actually with my subject. I spent a lot of time thinking about them and making the decision about who I want to photograph. I really, for the most part, don't photograph celebrities. I think the most famous person I did, of course, is in the show right now, and that's John Lewis. But I didn't do him because he was a congressman. I did him because I consider him an angel who walks the world, who walks the planet. And I kind of look for angels that walk the planet. I spend a maximum of 15 minutes photographing. I prefer 5 minutes. And that's related to the newspaper job of doing a headshot. There were many times we had to go into photograph a subject matter. It was a matter of run in, shoot 5, 10, 15 frames and on to the next job. It was a matter of getting a headshot and moving on. And I kind of like that idea because there was no chance in a sense of preparing for it, or there was no sense of sorrow afterwards. You got a headshot. And all of my work, that's the constant of my work right now, is the headshot. So I don't spend a lot of time with this actual subject.
Thank you, Don. Ed or Ada, do you have anything to you want to add to Robert's question?
Basically, you know, when I do the protest work, you don't really have a lot of time. It's just very quick decisions you have to make while you're basically moving. And when you do, you know, get to the point where you can talk with somebody or see what they're all involved with. I always like Peter Falk's character in Columbo. He has this way of just being in front of people, and he has a very low-key thing, very non-threatening, and I think that's how I like to approach the subjects. You know, he has that old raincoat, he just walks around, he figures out who killed who, but that process is so soft, it's very nice. You're not very confrontational, although I've been approached by a number of people, mainly pro-Trump people that want to know what I was doing, am I with CNN, things like that. But basically, you just kind of walk with the crowd, get a feel for it, and you try to document as close as you can to their effect.
Great, thank you, Ed. Ada, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, for I have two different approaches. So for my protest work, as Ed said, is extremely quick. But I do take the time, like for instance, especially with children, that even though I'm in the street and legally, like everything flies, I feel the responsibility to ask the moms always. And so the do better and the I want to matter is that's a family, and they all make the signs. But it's by you just approaching and the mom, and then just say, okay, let's continue. And it's, you know, just shoot and whatever, but just be aware that I'm here. My name's Ada, here's my card. and just do it that way. With the caravans, I do it in a different way. I actually travel with them. I immerse myself in the community. I am really part of them. I eat what they eat, walk when they walk, stay where they stay, and build very long-lasting relationships with the people I photograph. They're not my subjects, they become my friends.
Wow. Thank you, Ada. Laura, do you want to ask I know you have questions too.
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank all of you for presenting, and thank you, Morgan, for sharing that beautiful poem. All of my questions that I have prepared seem just so minor and meaningless at the moment. And I think Rob's question about, kind of about your relationship with your subjects actually kind of ties in with some of the questions I had about vulnerability in your images too, and putting yourself sort of in a vulnerable space to connect with your subjects, even if it is for a brief moment. So I'm going to ask a different question. I'm just wondering if you could share what you all are working on now.
Ed or Don or Ada, do you want to dive in?
I'm working right now on an archive of my work that's going to be going, it's called the Briscoe Center for American History. It's part of University of Texas, and they're going to be archiving all my negatives and notes, and which really consists of a lot of Post-it notes, really, that I've done over the years, and they're going to be archiving it in Austin, Texas. And it's a very painful process of going through a lot of this stuff, but a lot of boxes in the studio right now.
Yeah, and I'm working on little books. I've always loved working and sketching and writing in moleskin books. And then a few years ago, I found out that I could actually insert photographs and have the books printed. And so I'm working on a project, series of little books called Where Earth Touches Sky. And sky is beautiful. I never really have looked at the sky in my life. And I mean, to really look at it. And so I'm skimming the earth, and whatever the surface is, whatever the landscape is, becomes kind of minimal in relation to the sky. And then I'm putting them in this little beautiful moleskin book, like notes. It's a very soft project. Unlike the faces, this is just very gentle, and I feel good doing them.
And I'm here working at the border. We have a lot of families, a lot of teenagers here in Tijuana that are at great risk. And I'm working with these communities.
Thank you, everyone. Robert, do you have, I know you had another question for the panel.
Yes, I do. Let me grab that real quick. So like in your process of taking images, how does the relationship of like taking space or holding space play out either in your process of actually taking or in the work that follows after?
Thank you, Robert. Ed or Ada or Don, do you want to respond?
Could you explain a little bit further to me what you mean by that?
Yes. I guess like, how do you perceive yourself behind the camera as you're taking images, or is it more of like you're simply a witness to, like the camera is the witness to the event?
That's how I pretty much feel about it. My input is minimal. It's really the subject, that I'm really interested in, and so that's how I approach it. I don't really like to, change things around. I don't, and as a matter of fact, my whole working method, I don't use Photoshop or anything like that. It's just really, it's very direct from the camera to the print.
It's a very interesting thought. And mine, everything in front of the camera is contrived, pre-planned. Because I always want the face in the same place on my camera. Eyes open, lips closed, look directly into the camera, and then I do a series of shots within the 5 minutes allotted. And that allows me to vary what's behind the camera. I enjoy working in the dark room. And so that's where my prints vary. It can become anything in the dark room, but in front of the camera, that's the constant. It's the same. So I kind of work the reverse of most photographers.
And for me, I try to be as invisible as possible to the whole situation, to just be just part of the community and understanding the community, and then photographing it. And I choose black and white because the colors here are just so loud in Central Mexico, that I shoot in color, but I switch it into black and white because I want the main focus to be.
Thank you all for that. I know we are over our hour time here, but I want to check in with Laura. Do you have a question? We do have one from the audience, but I want to make sure if you have another question you want to put to the panel, we get to that first.
Let's do one from the audience.
Okay. So I think this will mostly be for Ed, but maybe Don and Eda can chime in. They want to know, is there a difference in the people who protest today versus in the past? Do you notice a difference in what they stand for now versus in the past, or how they approach getting their message out? Now and then messages. Ed, do you have any thoughts there?
Yes, I think that my original stuff in the 60s, there was a different way of thinking. The news was different then, and the divisiveness was not as much as we have now. And there was a definite feeling about an earnesty then, and as an earnestness right now as well. And I just think that the difference is in the media, in a way, about how events are covered. And when you just see these masses of camera people in front, and I think it just changes the whole feeling of things. And I just think, the good thing is there's still protests going on, but the difference is, I think, in maybe how people are feeling about it. I think in the 60s, there was a lot of anti-war, because beginning of the racial divide and whatnot. And now we're really going right into it. So, and one thing I say in a way that I take pictures to prevent truth decay, because I think there is that big changes that's going on right now in the media and whatnot. And I think it's important for people to be out there and show the real world.
I love that phrase, truth decay.
Yeah. Don or Ada, do you have anything to add to this question about protests now and then?
This was, I didn't do any protest prior to this.
Wow. Well, we are at the end of our time, and I know I want to be sensitive to that because we all zoom in, zoom out. I want to take this moment to thank everyone who joined us here this evening. Thank you. I want to take a special note to thank our panelists tonight, Ada, Don, and Ed. I also want to thank our moderators, Laura and Robert. Thank you so much. I want to remind everyone a couple of notes. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we will be posting a recording of this on our YouTube page, so keep an eye out for that. Also, if you enjoyed tonight's program, we'll have plenty of more programs coming to you from the Michener, so please stay tuned and join us again. And if you can, I hope this has whetted your appetite to come see this amazing show in person, and I encourage you all to do that. Until we can see each other in person, I want to say, everyone, I wish you to be safe, stay healthy, and stay arty, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Oh, there you